Chapter 6. Cigarettes. A few key facts. Nicotine is found in tobacco plants. Cigarettes are dried tobacco leaves and additives wrapped in paper, usually with a filter made of cellulose acetate. Nicotine is a stimulant. In terms of popularity, it's falling out of favour now, but still legal pretty much everywhere. Cigarettes are smoked. Nicotine can also be consumed in patches, sprays, and inhalators. Nicotine reaches the brain within seconds, and the effects last for a few minutes. Some effects include increased heart rate and blood pressure, as well as a reduction in withdrawal symptoms for dependent smokers. This chapter is really about tobacco. I'm cheating by calling it cigarettes, but alphabetically it just works. Tobacco, the dried leaf that is smoked in cigarettes, cigars and pipes, and taken in various other forms such as snus and chewing tobacco, has been used as a recreational drug for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The World Health Organization states that the tobacco plant was first cultivated in the Americas in around 6000 BC. There is evidence that indigenous Americans were smoking tobacco as far back as 1 BC, as well as using tobacco enemas. There's some suggestion that tobacco was used ceremonially at this time. Christopher Columbus brought tobacco from the Americas to Europe, and its popularity spread quickly across the globe from that point. In the 18th century, snuff was a popular method for consumption of tobacco, while in the 19th century, the cigar overtook it. Cigarettes as a method for smoking became popular during World War I, when they were included as part of British soldiers' ration packs. Once cigarettes could be manufactured mechanically and at a large scale, their popularity rose dramatically. 2 in 3 regular smokers will have started smoking before the age of 18, and smoking is illegal in this age group in the UK and many other countries around the world. The percentage of current smokers who want to quit is similarly high. Around 2 in 3 current smokers report wanting to stop smoking. People who smoke report that it relieves stress and can make them feel calmer and more relaxed. But is this really the case? What is it? Nicotine is the active compound in tobacco. Its molecular structure is similar to the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, and it binds to acetylcholine receptors in the brain, mimicking the action of the neurotransmitter and giving nicotine its mild stimulant properties. More later. It also has an influence on dopamine, a neurotransmitter that is thought to be involved in reward and pleasure. Because nicotine is the active compound in tobacco, people often mistakenly believe that it's the nicotine that is responsible for the harms caused by smoking cigarettes. Nicotine can be habit-forming, but interestingly, there's something unique about cigarettes that makes the nicotine in them particularly addictive. Because of the chemical balance, the pH, of tobacco in cigarettes, the smoke has to be breathed into the lungs in order for the nicotine to be absorbed into the blood. This is in contrast with other tobacco products like chewing tobacco or even cigars, where the nicotine is absorbed mostly through the lining of the mouth. When nicotine is absorbed through the lungs, it gets into the bloodstream and then the brain within seconds, while absorption through the mouth is a much slower route. The quicker a substance reaches the brain, the higher the risk of dependence on it. What are the short-term effects? While there's no real intoxication effect of cigarettes, if a person is not used to nicotine, a cigarette can make them feel sick or dizzy. Nicotine reaches the brain within seconds, and the effect of nicotine wears off within a few minutes. Smoking a cigarette raises your heart rate. If a person is a regular smoker and dependent on nicotine, then smoking a cigarette can bring a person out of withdrawal. Nicotine withdrawal is characterized by feelings of anxiety, irritability, headaches, and difficulty concentrating. Many researchers think that the reason that smokers report feeling lower anxiety and stress levels after smoking a cigarette is because of the alleviation of these withdrawal effects. This seems likely, as long-term use of cigarettes is associated with higher levels of depression and anxiety. What are the longer-term effects? The physical health impacts of cigarettes have been known for well over half a century. Cigarettes are responsible for the premature deaths of 2 in 3 regular users, according to recent figures from the UK and the USA. Smoking causes lung cancer and at least 13 other types of cancer to varying degrees. Cancer Research UK estimates that smoking causes a quarter of all cancer deaths in the UK and nearly 1 in 5 cancer cases. Aside from cancers, smoking also increases the risk of a variety of other heart and lung diseases. There has been some suggestion that smoking, or nicotine in particular, might be beneficial for Parkinson's disease. The charity Parkinson's UK has even funded research looking into this. However, as yet, the evidence is thin on the ground. and there's some reason to believe that this seemingly positive association might be misleading. Given that so many smokers are killed by their habit, the smokers who survive long enough to be at risk of Parkinson's disease might be an unusually hardy bunch, so it could be this aspect of their genetic or environmental makeup, rather than the nicotine they're consuming, that's protective against Parkinson's. Elderly smokers represent a really interesting population to research for this reason. If we can identify why these individuals don't succumb to smoking-related illnesses, this might be hugely beneficial for designing treatments for others. Myths and misconceptions. Nicotine is extremely harmful. While nicotine is the addictive substance in cigarettes, it's not the really harmful part of them. The process of burning tobacco releases carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, at least 70 known carcinogens, and a variety of other chemicals. Nicotine is addictive, but specifically in cigarettes rather than in other forms, as discussed earlier. Nicotine is a mild stimulant and has an effect on health probably more akin to coffee than speed. It increases your heart rate and blood pressure slightly. So this is a myth. Menthol cigarettes are safer, or menthol cigarettes are more harmful. There's disagreement even among the myths surrounding menthol cigarettes, tobacco cigarettes flavoured with mint. There has been less research conducted on menthol cigarettes compared to regular cigarettes, but there's no evidence to suggest they are any more or less harmful. It seems likely they're just as harmful as regular tobacco. This is a myth. Roll-ups or natural tobacco are less harmful than other cigarettes. It's a common belief that rolling tobacco contains fewer of the harmful chemicals and components found in machine-made cigarettes. When questioned about it, between 21% and 40% of roll-up smokers in Canada, Australia, the UK and the USA said they smoke roll-ups because they thought they were healthier than manufactured cigarettes. This is a myth. Some studies have found that rolling tobacco actually contains more additives by weight than factory-made cigarettes, and one animal study suggested that rolling tobacco was more addictive, although this was only a small study, meaning the results might not be very reliable. But there are perhaps some reasons to believe this increased addictiveness could be the case in humans too. Although repeated nicotine use can lead to dependence on cigarettes, a lot of the addiction can be psychological. Smokers have their ritual of smoking, be this going outside, the act of buying cigarettes, or even removing them from the packet and lighting them. For people who smoke roll-ups, this ritual can be extended. The act of building the cigarette, the anticipation of being about to smoke it, maybe this increases the reward experience of smoking and therefore the addictive properties. Of course, this wasn't what was happening in the animal study, unless there were some particularly dexterous mice who were rolling their own. This is a myth. Light or low-tar cigarettes are less harmful than other cigarettes. You might have noticed that there's no such thing as Marlboro Lights anymore. Tobacco companies are no longer allowed to market cigarettes as light or low tar, since light cigarettes were found to be no less harmful than regular cigarettes. And this was due to the difference between humans and machines. Light cigarettes, first introduced in the 1970s, never actually contained less tar than other cigarettes. The alterations were made to the filter. More ventilation holes were put in to allow more smoke to escape before it was inhaled into the lungs. The cigarette paper itself was also made out of a more porous material for the same reason, the idea being that fewer harmful particles would be breathed in. These newly designed cigarettes were tested by organisations such as the Federal Trade Commission in the USA, using machines that smoked the cigarettes and took readings of the tar yield, and lo and behold, this new design yielded lower tar levels. The machines inhaled lower levels of harmful smoke. But humans aren't machines, and they altered their smoking patterns, moving their fingers further over the filter, squeezing at the filters and dragging more deeply on the cigarette. Experimental research has since borne this out. Smokers get just as much tar from light cigarettes as from other brands. But just because the tobacco industry are not allowed to call their products low tar anymore, doesn't mean they don't try to get the incorrect message across in other ways. In countries where they are allowed to, many companies still use descriptive words or packaging colour to imply reduced harm, for example, gold or red. It's a myth. Using a hookah pipe or shisha is less harmful than smoking cigarettes. Shishas, hookahs, water pipes, hubble bubble, these are all names to describe the practice of smoking tobacco through a water chamber via a long hose-like mouthpiece. Flavoured tobacco is placed under a foil-covered platform at the top of the bowl, then covered with hot charcoal. Users breathe through the hose, drawing smoke through the water and into their mouths. Shisha is sociable, with pipes having multiple hoses or hoses being passed around. Water pipe use is on the rise in the UK, particularly among teenagers and young adults, and there are some worrying misconceptions about its safety. Many people, for example, do not realise that the flavoured tobacco smoked through a shisha pipe is still tobacco. It's possible to get non-tobacco herbal mixtures to smoke, but these are less common than flavoured tobacco. The herbal mixtures still release a number of the same toxins found in tobacco smoke when burnt, and there is benzene and carbon monoxide released by the burning charcoal that is also inhaled. Some erroneously believe that the water purifies the smoke somehow. There is no evidence to suggest this. In 2016, a systematic review of the literature on shisha pipes was undertaken, and researchers found that the use of the pipes was linked to many of the same illnesses and risks as smoking cigarettes. Respiratory disease, lung cancer, mouth cancer, poor mental health, low birth weight of offspring, and cardiovascular disease levels were all increased compared to those who did not use shisha, to name a few health outcomes. Unfortunately, no studies to date have compared risks from shisha use directly to risks from using cigarettes. It might be that using shisha is less harmful than smoking, but even if that were the case, this could be because of the nature of use. Shisha is used socially and at special occasions, rather than being used daily in the way cigarettes are. However, it might be that there are increased risks from shisha compared to cigarettes. For example, as the smoke is cooled by the water, it's easier to hold it in the lungs for longer, potentially increasing exposure to the harmful compounds found in tobacco smoke. As yet, we just don't know, but the idea that shisha is less harmful than cigarettes is not true. The evidence to date suggests that puff for puff, shisha is broadly equivalent in risk to tobacco cigarettes. So it's a myth. Cutting down smoking will reduce the levels of harm from smoking. It seems hard to believe that this isn't the case, but cutting down the number of cigarettes you smoke doesn't necessarily reduce the risk of smoking-related harm. This is connected to the myth earlier. If a person is used to getting a certain amount of nicotine in a day, then if they smoke fewer cigarettes, they're likely to draw more deeply, take more puffs, and hold the smoke in their lungs longer for the cigarettes that they do smoke. And also, of course, tobacco is harmful even at lower levels. Psychologically, cutting down is a great first step in the quit process, but in terms of harm reduction, quitting is really the only way. So this is partly true. Everyone dies of something, so why not smoking? Smoking just means I'll miss out the last few years, which are the worst ones. This is a frequent comment I've heard when giving talks or chatting to libertarians on the internet. And it's true that we will all die of something. However, it's not true to say that smoking means you'll miss the old and ill years at the end of life. Smoking-related illnesses and deaths are often extremely unpleasant, protracted, and earlier than non-tobacco-related deaths. Yes, you might miss the later years of your life if you smoke, but you might also find yourself seriously ill at an earlier age, and you might lose your life many years earlier than you would otherwise. It's a myth. I've smoked for years, I've already damaged my health, there's no point quitting. With all the doom and gloom in the earlier myth, and how notoriously difficult it is to stop smoking, it's not surprising that some smokers will presume that the damage has already been done, so there's no point in giving up. However, a growing body of research has found that the health benefits of stopping smoking apply even to the most hardened smoker. Within months of stopping smoking, a person will have a lower risk of stroke and heart disease than they did while they were a smoker. No matter how long you've smoked, there are benefits from quitting. So that's a myth. What don't we know? You might think that we know all there is to know about cigarettes and tobacco. We've known for more than half a century that smoking causes lung cancer, and the physical effects of smoking are fairly well understood. But there is still a lot that we don't know. For example, why do some people find it easy to stop smoking while others really struggle? There's evidence that smoking behaviour is partly genetic. Slight differences in a person's genotype, their DNA code, predict how heavily they will smoke if they're a smoker, and these small differences can affect smoking behaviour up to the level of a couple of cigarettes extra per day. This might go some way to explaining why it's easier for some people to give up than others, and could even represent a method to work out how to help a person to stop. If your dependence is stronger, maybe it would benefit you to have counselling support, use nicotine replacement therapy, or even take medication to help, called pharmacotherapy, rather than trying to give up cold turkey. The other emerging area of research that I'm really interested in is trying to understand why smoking rates are so much higher in populations with mental health difficulties. We understand the physical effects of tobacco so well, but we're much less sure about why these associations come about. At the beginning of this chapter, I mentioned that smoking is associated with depression and anxiety. But why is this? Does smoking somehow increase the risk? Do people who suffer from these conditions take up smoking for some reason? Or does something else that happens earlier in life, or even something more innate, predict both the likelihood to smoke and risk of poor mental health? It's really hard to tease this out. Smoking is also seen at far higher levels in people with psychotic disorders or schizophrenia. Historically, it's been assumed that this is because nicotine might alleviate some of the negative side effects of antipsychotic medication, which can be quite severe. But smoking often predates a person getting ill, which might call this into question. Also, really interestingly, when researchers investigated the genetics of schizophrenia risk in a huge study of over 200,000 individuals, one of the 100 or so genetic variants, a single letter change in the DNA code of some individuals compared to others, that predicts the risk of schizophrenia, has also been found, in a completely different study, to predict the number of cigarettes per day that daily smokers are likely to smoke. The same single letter change of DNA predicts both heaviness of smoking and risk of schizophrenia. What might this mean? Well, it could just be a coincidence. We don't really understand how tiny genetic changes like this might lead to differences in risks of behaviours like smoking or in diseases like schizophrenia. This variant might be doing nothing at all. Intriguingly, though, another possibility might be that this variant doesn't have anything to do with schizophrenia, but is seen in the schizophrenia study because it predicts heaviness of smoking, and smoking is seen at such high levels in individuals with schizophrenia. In fact, this variant is also seen in genetic studies of the predictors of lung cancer, and we know this is due to its link to smoking, because when the genetics of lung cancer were investigated in non-smokers only, this variant was no longer associated with the disease. I really wanted to investigate this with schizophrenia, but unfortunately there are currently no large enough data sets available where schizophrenia, genetics and smoking status have all been measured. It might even be evidence that smoking might increase the risk of schizophrenia, but we can't tell from these findings alone. I don't think the evidence is convincing yet that smoking increases the risk of schizophrenia, and it's also worth thinking about the size of the risk too. It's minuscule in comparison to the risk of smoking-related diseases such as lung cancer. But that doesn't mean the link between smoking and mental health isn't important. As I've mentioned, smoking is seen at far higher levels in people with schizophrenia than national averages. Recent estimates suggest around 60% of patients with schizophrenia are smokers. And people with the disorder have a lower life expectancy than average as well, often from diseases that are linked to smoking. Finally, as we've seen the prevalence of smoking reduce in countries like the UK, we've begun to notice that this might be increasing health inequality. Estimates suggest that in 2018, 14.9% of the adult population in the UK were smokers. In the 1950s, it was estimated that almost half the adult population of the UK smoked. This then dropped gradually over the following decades, with decreases speeding up more recently as policies were put in place to improve education and limit advertising of tobacco products. But smoking is becoming more and more socially patterned, as people with better support networks are finding it easier to stop smoking than those without the support. This seems counterintuitive at first. You'd think that reducing the number of people smoking, we've seen huge drops in smoking prevalence in the UK over the last few decades, would improve health. But overarching numbers can be misleading and hide the patterns in subgroups of people, and this really suggests that more support is needed for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds before health inequality gets any wider.